All right, let's just jump right in. We've got this really strange, kind of contradictory relationship with animals, right? It's a puzzle that plays out in our homes, on our couches, and on our dinner plates every single day.
I mean, it really all boils down to this one simple question. Why do we love our dogs, but eat pigs? Why does one animal get a name, a comfy bed, and a spot in the family photo, while another animal that's just as smart, just as aware, ends up as a meal? This is the core of what's known as the meat paradox.
And if you look at the numbers, they paint a pretty wild picture of this split personality we have. In the United States, something like 62% of households have a pet, and we treat them like family. But at the same time, the average American eats over 270 pounds of meat every year. So we're a nation of animal lovers and also a nation of animal eaters.
So how do we square that circle? How do our minds possibly handle these two completely opposite realities coexisting? Well, the answer lies in this really powerful psychological mechanism. Think of it like a referee inside our heads, constantly trying to keep the peace.
And that powerful force has a name. It's called cognitive dissonance. It's that cringy, uncomfortable feeling you get when your actions just don't line up with your beliefs. You know, like you believe animals shouldn't suffer, but you also really enjoy a burger. That clash creates this mental tension, and our brain's #1 job is to get rid of that tension as fast as it can.
Let's look at how this works in the real world. A couple of researchers, Jared Prunty and Kevin Apple, did this fascinating experiment. They started by simply asking people if they agreed or disagreed with this statement right here. And no surprise, most people agreed with it. Of course they did.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. After they got people to commit to that belief, they then showed them some pretty graphic information about factory farming. And look at this. The group that made that initial commitment, those are the dark bars, they showed a much stronger intention to cut back on meat. And why? Because their brains were scrambling to stay consistent with the belief they just stated. They were trying to close that cognitive dissonance gap.
But let's be real. Most people don't just suddenly become vegetarian after thinking about this for a minute. Changing our habits, especially our eating habits, is really hard. So if our behavior isn't changing, that means our brain has to be doing something else to solve the problem. It's taking the path of least resistance.
So, what are these mental escape routes? Well, it turns out our minds have developed this incredible toolkit of psychological tricks to help us navigate this whole conflict without ever having to give up steak.
The first, and maybe the most powerful strategy, is this. We subconsciously just decide that the animals we eat are, well, dumber. We convince ourselves that animals like cows, pigs, and chickens are simply less capable of thinking, feeling pain, or having any real experiences, especially when compared to our pets.
And this chart shows us exactly how our brains are doing that. Researchers literally mapped out how we rate different animals. So you've got edibility going up the side and perceived mind along the bottom. Now look at the top right. Dogs, cats, dolphins. We see them as having a lot of mind, so they have very low edibility. Now look over to the top left. Cows, chickens, fish. We see them as highly edible, and we grant them very little mind. It's a perfect inverse relationship. The more we want to eat it, the less we think it thinks.
Okay, the second mental trick our brain uses is its complete inability to emotionally connect with huge numbers. You know, when a problem scale gets so big it's just overwhelming, our empathy kind of just shuts down. Take a look at this number, 10 billion. That's how many farm animals are slaughtered for food every single year in the US alone. It's so massive, so abstract, that it just becomes a statistic, not a tragedy. Our brains can understand it mathematically, sure, but we can't feel it emotionally. It just doesn't feel real.
Mother Teresa just nailed this phenomenon perfectly. We feel so much more for a story about one single suffering dog than we do for a statistic about 10 billion animals. This is called psychic numbing. Our compassion, it seems, is a limited resource, and it's wired to respond to individuals, not these vast, faceless numbers.
All right, our final mental tool is maybe the sneakiest one of all, because we use it every single day without even thinking about it. And that tool is language. The words we use for our food are actually really clever at creating an emotional buffer between the animal it came from and what's on our plate.
I mean, think about it. We don't say we're eating cow, we eat beef. We don't eat pig, we eat pork. We don't eat sheep, we eat mutton. This little linguistic trick is no accident. These words serve a huge psychological purpose. They turn the animal into an object. They turn a who into a what, and it totally sanitizes the entire act of eating.
Now here's the thing. Our brains aren't just performing these mental gymnastics all on their own in a vacuum. Nope. They're constantly being nudged and reinforced by these really powerful forces in our society and our culture.
Paul McCartney's famous quote here points to a huge societal factor: physical invisibility. The whole process of turning a living, breathing animal into a neat little package of meat is intentionally hidden from us. It happens in remote places, behind windowless walls, far, far away from the public eye. Out of sight, out of mind.
And it starts when we're really young. We're basically socialized to believe in this fantasy version of farm life. You know, children's books, cartoons, toys, they're all filled with these images of smiling pigs rolling in the mud and happy cows grazing in these big, sunny pastures. It sets this baseline in our minds that is completely disconnected from the reality of modern industrial agriculture.
And that fantasy is reinforced everywhere, especially in advertising. I mean, look at this. On the left, you've got the classic happy cows marketing image we're all so familiar with. And on the right, you have the stark reality presented by animal advocacy groups. This visual clash just perfectly highlights that conflict between the comforting myth we're sold and the uncomfortable truth.
So we've seen the internal psychology, we've seen the external pressures. Let's kind of pull it all together now and see exactly how this whole meat paradox is kept alive and well.
Okay, so here's the whole process in a nutshell. It all kicks off with that uncomfortable conflict in our heads, right? Cognitive dissonance. To get rid of that feeling, our brain uses its toolkit of tricks, like denying that food animals have minds, or just going numb to the huge numbers. Then, the language we use, like calling cow meat beef, creates even more emotional distance. And finally, society reinforces all of it by hiding the reality and selling us a fantasy.
Now, look, the point of all this isn't to tell you what to think or what to eat. Not at all. It's really just to pull back the curtain on the hidden psychological architecture that shapes our complex relationship with animals. So the final question is really for you. Now that you've seen the mental machinery at work, does it change how you see your own choices or how you see the world around you? Something to think about.